Hi friends, welcome to Behind the Returns. This is your host Arun and I head the mutual fund research at Funds India. As always, we have a super interesting guest with us. We have Mr. Sri Datta, who heads the equities at Canara Robeco Mutual Fund. Hi Sri, thank you so much for joining.
Hey, hi Arun. Hi to everyone who's there around. Thanks for this opportunity. It's been very kind of Arun to introduce us on this platform, and I think this would be a kind of great interaction for the investors to know what we do and what we don't do generally in our funds.
Yeah, sure, Sri. Definitely looking forward to a great conversation. So just to start off with, let me start with a very hypothetical question. So let's assume you were asked to replicate your entire fund strategy, but the point is that you will have to teach an algorithm to run your fund for the next 5 years. Right? So and obviously the second condition which is put on you is that should at least try and replicate, let's say at least match up to you for 70 to 80% of your original efficacy. So how would
Sure.
you go about trying to solve this kind of problem? And broadly, I mean, you don't need to go specific into the exact rules, but broadly, how would you approach this kind of a rule-based algorithm that is trying to replicate you?
Sure. That's clearly an interesting and a question which I've never heard, but let me try to answer it. So the strategy is based on what underlying businesses are and what kind of businesses create wealth. And there is a strong belief, and of course there is a data to back it over last 30, 40, 50 years, more so in last 50 years as compared to the 50 years before that, when value investing or typically cigar butt investing was a trend. So you have to basically convert that thought process that wealth is created by the businesses who create free cash flows over a period of time. That's what you need to build in the portfolio then. Uh, so what you do is effectively uh, you would actually try to find out or screen all the businesses that are available, which are trending up and down on ROC and ROE profile, and whatever businesses which are trending up on ROC profile, and at the same time who have a very good track record in terms of average ROE, ROC, those are the businesses which will come in your portfolio. That's the first stage. So in each sector, effectively you go, and in each sector you pick up these names, and in addition, at the margin, you pick those trends also, because there will be stable, steady compounders, which is high ROC, very stable ROE, ROCs, and gaining market shares. But there would be companies, like all businesses go through cycles. So even good businesses go through cycles. So whenever they go through cycle and come back, you see those trends also emerging in both the ROE, ROC profiles as well as the earnings deviations that happen. So that's the one critical part of what investors or I would do if I were to just hand it over to a system. That's one. Second, and equally critical is that human brain cannot be replicated in terms of sector rotations and how you think between the sectors. Because at all point in time, there will be different sectors where you will have earnings deviations within the same quality of businesses also. Just to elaborate on this with one example, say auto OEMs, FMCG, consumer durables, all are quality balance sheets, relatively quality managements, have been doing very well over last 10, 15 years if you take a longer horizon. But within that also, as a fund manager, we actually keep rotating every 2, 3 years depending on where the earnings deviation is. So capturing that earnings deviation will be very difficult. So what can be done to actually negate it is actually just you go sector neutral. So as a passive system guy, you have to go sector neutral. Even during the downturns of auto, you have to still hold the best names in auto. So that would be second, that you go sector neutral. You look at the trends of ROE, ROCs and how they are trending up or down. And third, probably you run a screener on earnings deviations, and wherever there are positive earnings deviation, you try to actually increase within the same names. You try to increase and reduce the weights in these names. That's to put it very simply, but it is as not as simple as I'm telling you. There is a lot of human brain involved in terms of the competitive choices that you make, which I think eventually it will come, but it will take a long time for it to be replicated. I think that's a very long answer to a very short question that you had.
So Sri, just extending on the same question. So out of the three steps that you had mentioned, where do you think the nuance of humans is the highest out of those three steps?
Earnings deviations, identifying earnings deviations. Because see, quality businesses, there are 200 or 100 quality businesses in India. On a ballpark basis, those 100 businesses move here and there. Every year you will have 5-10 additions and 5-10 subtraction. But there are 50-70 businesses which have consistently been compounding over a period of time. Of course, they will go through the cycle, but for a long period of time. So if you take a longer horizon, they will find their place there. But within them, how do you move the weights? Like at one point in time, we had 5% HUL, and now we have 3.5%. And at some point in time, we did not have HUL or only 1.5% HUL. That is a function of what kind of earnings deviations are happening in those sectors, and that is captured by. That's where the active management comes in. That's where you have continuous process of your analyst, the entire team on top down, bottom up basis doing research, and that's why how you know that HUL is gaining market share in the say soaps category vis-a-vis GCPL in this environment, and this is a large segment for it. So it'll be earning sticker. So there will be multiple earning stickers, drivers for a particular company, and identifying that is, I think, would be very difficult to replicate, because typically, even when I said that look at the earnings momentum, the system will capture it in backend when it would have already happened. Whereas in active fund managers, or to create alpha, you have to capture it first before it playing out.
Right, right.
And that typically in our portfolio reflects in weights.
Sure, got it, got it. So also, Sri, in your framework, I mean, obviously, when you pick stocks, there are broadly four things which any fund manager looks at. One is the quality, the growth prospects, which what you call as the earnings deviation, and the quality of the management, and finally comes the valuation. So out of these four, it's very, sometimes you get all these four together, but usually it is like you will have to make a trade-off in one of these parameters. So when it comes to picking stocks, so let's say I have to rate each and every parameter from 1 to 10, just for us to understand it better. How do you go about doing the trade-off? Which is the factor where you might not want to take a compromise, or you might not want to lower the dial down, and what are the factors where you're still okay kind of slightly lowering the dial down? So out of these four factors, how do you approach each and
So
every stock?
clearly, business and management is something that is hygiene. So you don't want to compromise on it too much. But it is, again, it is not black and white. Although you have to be very cautious about the kind of business and management, businesses are evolving entities like human beings. So they keep changing every cycle. Managements learn lessons, businesses learn lessons, and they change every cycle. Uh, but business and management, in terms of looking at their historical track record, is a hygiene, I think. So you can go into quartile 1 or quartile 2 businesses, but beyond that, it is not a acceptable, generally acceptable thing, unless until there is something dramatically turn around that is happening in business, and which we are pretty confident about. Not that we don't do that, but very very low weights, and generally. So these are the two factors which are not a compromise 99% of the time. Second, the third factor, which is valuation, you said. I think valuation is something that for a quality business you have to always pay higher. I mean, it's rarely like in GFC or probably in March, you got some of the quality businesses relatively cheaper. Otherwise, quality business, you have to always pay fair price and then compound money. So there is always a weight in a fair quality business, because that's why it is quality, and that's why everybody is paying in that valuation. So you have to wait for next year's earnings to come in. So you always have to bet on compounding rather than. So valuation is something that is a parameter where we typically are willing to compromise, looking at the intrinsic valuation. And why so? Because the intrinsic valuation and what appears statistically in terms of PE and EV by EBITDA and price to book can be fairly different. So just take an example, and let me give you a disclaimer. All the examples that I'm giving are just for explanation purpose. So let us look at Kotak Bank. There is always this debate, and there are a lot of research analysts who keep writing that it is a sell because the valuation is high. But you don't look at next year's price to book at 3.5 times or 4 times to say it's expensive. You say expensive if you see that the ability of company to compound earnings or grow earnings, both in terms of visibility as well as sustainability, is not there. If it is there, then you'll always trade at a higher price to book. In case of say banks, which is what was the case with HDFC Bank. I mean, if you go back and check 98, 99, 1998, 99, HDFC Bank even then was trading at 3.5 times price to book. So if, and it's not, it doesn't change. If the view on the business changes, people will change the price to book multiples in case of banking, or because that's the example we have taken, but not without that. So as long as there is a high probability of sustainability of that earnings compounding as well as visibility on that earnings because of the inherent business model, then that business you will never get that relatively cheap. So Nestle is a classic example. I mean, the cheapest it would have got is probably 25 times 1 year forward in last 20 years. So
Sure. So broadly, when it comes to this framework, how do you actually translate that into your portfolio? So can you just give us a sense of with let's say somebody goes and let's say somebody listens to this interview and then goes and looks at your fact sheet. So how should can you just take us through how this framework that you've explained right now is reflecting in the fact sheet, so that once somebody sees the fact sheet more than the returns, they can also figure out the thought process that. So how should an investor go through the fact sheet and then put your framework in perspective?
So like what I said, valuation is something where typically we are willing to compromise a little bit because we know that it compounds, and so there is a weight, but you'll make money because of inherent business characteristics. So if you look at the portfolios, and particularly the Canara Robeco Equity Diversified, you would find that 70-75% of the portfolio is on the quality growth side, whereas you will have 20% of the portfolio which is on value side. So as long as you see, and value, I mean, not necessarily only statistically cheap, but the businesses where we feel that there are certain tangible and time-bound drivers which are today available cheap, but from outsiders' perspective, they are available cheap. So that's segregation. So if you actually go through sector by sector, you would see this trend in portfolio. That, let us take an example of, say, consumer durables. So we have Voltas, Whirlpool, which are the best franchises, Titan, Bata. They are not cheap on a PE basis. You look at banking, HDFC Bank, Kotak Bank, are the Bajaj Finance. These three are the highest probably weights in the portfolio. So these are not cheap. So in every sector, it will reflect. But the only thing we are not kind of fixated on is that it is not that we don't buy value. We buy value, but if we buy value when we find that there is some tangible changes that are going to happen in earnings over next 2 years. Because typically buying value is a one-time exercise. It doesn't compound earnings. You get a one-time earnings trigger, which can be very high also. Like just look at what happened during 18-19 or 19-20 in, say, Axis Bank or ICICI Bank. The credit cost failed, so earnings started growing at 50%. So that also happens, but that portion will always remain low because these are typically, in a way, a turnaround. There could be industry turnaround, competitive intensity turnaround. There could be operating leverage coming in. There could be financial leverage coming in. In case of banking, there could be credit cost falling. So there are multiple reasons for which that value which is there gets identified. So we are very clear that we will buy value when we see that there are time-bound drivers in place which we can monitor. I mean, what changes which will make people buy this business? That's what. So if you look at if you look at the sorry, my colleague was there. So if you look at the portfolio, that's how the portfolio is divided. So if you look at 70% of the portfolio, just looking at the portfolio will tell you that what I told you is true in the portfolio.
Right. So would it be fair to assume that usually the component of value will be at a lower proportion compared to the quality, the compounders that you talk about? Is that a natural thing that by nature that will be like your style, maybe the last 5 years, and will that be expected going forward?
That is a natural style to us, but again, we are very, very conscious of the fact that facts change and we change. So as I said even initially, that you had first 50 years when value massively outperformed, and last probably 20, 30 years, 40 years when growth quality has outperformed.
Right.
For value, generally, when we'll play value, we are not agnostic, averse to playing value. We'll play value when we find that the context is turning for value. the general context that you need for value investment to work or values to work is typically high nominal GDP growth rate. So you need an environment which is very conducive for everybody to grow.
Right. Right.
Vis-a-vis an environment where we have been for last 10 years, where it is tough to actually gain market share or tough to grow, tough to repair balance sheets. When you have a easy liquidity, when you have a typically easy resources availability, and when you have a nominal GDP growth rate of globe or domestic, which is much higher than the average rates, that's when typically a lot of these cyclicals as well as value do well. But the only thing that we will do, even when we move on that side, we would move in the quality cyclicals. It's or quality value. It is not as if you need to go down the quality curve for that. So the balance sheet and management will not compete. So just look at the example. Last cycle, I was an infra analyst, and L&T was like the bluest of blue chip, correct? Last 10 years, L&T has not gone anywhere. But it has not lost the quality of the business or ability to do that business. It is just that the business is not available. When that business will become available, you would see that as a one of the top position in our portfolio. So even when we will move to value side, we would be very conscious that we move into the quality managements and quality balance sheets, even if it means they kind of underperform a little bit to really going down the quality curve and taking all that risk, because the outlook is never certain. Typically, it's always your guess that this is what is going to happen and probability attached to it.
So in the current portfolio concept, is there any non-consensus views that you have currently built?
So we have, I think for last 1.5, 2 years or 3 years, we were running non-consensus domestic pharma was one. In March, April, auto we took in this fall. That was completely non-consensus. Now it is becoming consensus, but that was non-consensus when we bought. After 3 years, we actually came back into auto. That's what I was telling you in the other example, that within discretionary, whether you want to be in auto or the retail or the jewelry or somewhere, all of them are quality. You need to look at where the earnings are moving, and that's where you go. So auto is the non-consensus. And the third non-consensus that we are currently betting on, and we have taken position, as you can see in the fact sheet, is one or two NBFCs, which is based on the fact that the liquidity conditions are actually extremely favorable, and at least the quality NBFCs would, contrary to the general belief that they will suffer, they might end up benefiting, because whenever interest rates fall, actually it's bad for banks, it is good for NBFCs, as long as liquidity is available in abundance, and that's liquidity is abundantly available for the good quality NBFCs. So one or two pieces there. So that's, I think these are the three spaces where we have taken a little bit of contra view lately.
Right. So in the current times, what's the key debate that is going on internally within your investment team, or dilemmas,
so the biggest,
however you call it?
So the biggest debate that is going on first, of course, what is going to happen to the finance sector, banking sector in general, because there has been all sorts of moratorium numbers that you have seen, and there are all sorts of slippages number expectation that are thrown around, anywhere between 3% to 10%. I think the outcome on that would be a meaningful driver either ways for market, because if your banking system is in good shape or bad shape, that will decide what kind of underlying economic activity that happens in the economy. So if your slippages were to be 10%, you really can have a hard time, despite having huge global liquidity for next 2 years. Whereas if you really get really low NPAs, like what some of the quality NBFCs and quality banks have also been telling, that probably the slippage should be more around 3, 4, 5% rather than 8, 10%. Then it can change your view on that sector also, because people have really gone to the other extreme in terms of expectation that the entire banking system is going to get into trouble. So that's the thought. So that's, I think, the largest debate that is happening. And second, of course, is when are you going to have this? What is the kind of timeline that we are looking at in terms of healthcare? So we are on daily basis, we are tracking healthcare in terms of numbers, in terms of what is happening on vaccine. So that's second, and our best guess is probably March or June quarter of next calendar year should be the timeline when we should see some outcome on that. And third, like what you are asking, uh, is the environment going to change? So you have had a last 10 years where quality plus growth has outperformed massively. Are we going to have cyclical as well as value coming back? And what would be the drivers for that? Are we going to miss the drivers because you're on the other side, so you have to be doubly cautious of the fact changing on the other side. So what needs to change for us to uh, probably increase proportion on the quality cyclical side? Uh, is there any data point today? What are the data points that can come in over next 1 year or 6 months? Uh, because if it's a trend change, whenever it happens, it can sustain for a very long period of time. And there is a lot of this debate that inflation will probably come back because of the kind of global liquidity that is sloshing around. Uh, so, uh, what are those possibilities? And within those possibilities, what are the acceptable managements and balance sheets to us? Because that, as I said, is hygiene, correct? You don't even want to go on that side and go down the quality curve.
Right.
I think these are the three factors which are like consistent debate that is happening.
Right. Sure. So, she also in your last 10-15 years, what were the interesting mistakes that you've done, and based on that, how has your overall investment thought process changed?
So two mistakes, I think, in initial period of my career, particularly when I started managing the money, the mistake that I did was to be over conservative. So I think that doesn't help in this business, and that happens because actually I realized that it is a mistake of your own. You are willing to overlook your facts for your own opinions or biases, and that was leading you to be very extremely conservative. That was one mistake which I did in initial part of my career. I think second mistake which I have repeated so many times is typically being a fund manager or being an analyst, we are far more focused on business. So if business is good, there is always this tendency that if business is doing well, what can go wrong? But the promoters or management is equally important, if not more, except probably in FMCG businesses, which are like run on goodwill and brands rather than who's running it. But in most of the other businesses, I think promoters and management is very critical because you are a minority shareholder. They need to be willing to be transparent as well as sharing the wealth with you. Otherwise, the business might be great, but you will not make money. And that is classic case with this origin also. That's why PSUs have underperformed, correct? Because not that they have any malified intention, but their objectives are more socio-economic than just economics, which a minority shareholder should look for. So I made mistake particularly on the PSU side. So really, I think two broad fundamental mistakes. I mean, stock-wise, though, we have made a lot of mistakes.
Right. Sure. So, Shri, for somebody who's decided to pick up Can Robeco funds as one part of his portfolio. Now, obviously, there are other styles that you want to mix it up so that like overall you are diversified across styles. So, for somebody who's already picked Can Robeco, let's say equity diversified fund, what are the other styles you think will complement or probably give him the adequate diversity? So what is the other styles that he has to consider in his portfolio apart from yours? So let's say he picks yours, what is the other ones?
So clearly, like while I said that we are not only quality plus growth, we are not purist, if I have to use that word, or idealist. So we are somewhere in between. So we have quality plus growth tilt. That is a very natural tilt that as a house we have, but we are not buying averse to buying value. So if you look at Can Robeco equity diversified, you would have probably 70-30 ratio or 75-25 ratio, and it will keep changing depending on the opportunities that are available in the other part of the market. So the natural diversification, the guy would be to do reverse, exactly reverse. Somebody who has complete tilt towards value, but not averse to buying quality. So I think that would be the perfect diversification. But having said that, uh, I think a lot of your investment or fund returns or security returns is a function of what kind of horizon you have. Uh, and I have fairly strong belief that if you hold a mediocre business long enough, you will lose money. So, uh, so ideally, you should have 100% money in Canara Robeco equity diversified, given that we are tilted towards the businesses which generate cash flows, actual cash flows. But time to time in market, you would always have those cycles where the other part of market will do well. And if investor have that kind of view, they should actually look at the exact contra stuff as compared to what we do. But as I was explaining to you, I mean, so people always get it wrong. It's as a fund manager, it is not fixated. We are not buying quality plus growth compounders because that's the only part of the market. We are not buying LNT, or we don't have very high LNT or very high SBI or very high say Axis ICICI or very high a lot of other businesses probably in proportion because the facts have not changed there in terms of those showing those earnings deviation. Otherwise, all of these are quality cyclical, correct? These are quality value. This is not as if this LNT has any meaningful corporate governance issue or a balance sheet issue. Same with most of the other names I took, and there would be names in every sector like this. So if environment changes, we are willing to change to a great extent because that's why you're managing active money. Wherever earnings are and wherever acceptable management, acceptable business, and acceptable ROE ROC profile is there, you go there. I mean, that's what you are supposed to do.
So just as an extension of that same thought process, so now there are certain fund managers who would say that I will only stick to a particular style and be purist towards it. There are also fund managers who want to blend it, like how you said that you might want to slightly tilt towards value, but with obviously the quality overlay. So why is, I mean, why what is the biggest difficulty in trying to manage two styles or drifting towards one style and then again getting back? Why? So the purist argument would be that that's too difficult to do, and the multi-style approach would be like a purist will go through a long period of under. So how does somebody look at both of these, and how should somebody think through a fund manager who follows a purist style vis-a-vis a fund manager who follows a mix of both styles and then says I will take care of based on the environment. I'll shift. So how does somebody think through?
So the biggest difficulty is if a particular style doesn't come to you naturally, and that's why I said that we probably suppose today if the relatively cheaper part or value part as market understands it, and that's why I'm using it. Actually, everything is value, whether it is quality, compounding, everything is value. You're buying it because you feel that there is a value, correct?
Right.
Theoretically, but outsiders understand it as if value is a cheap stock. Okay, that's how outsiders. That's why I'm using it. So just pardon me for that. So when certain style comes to you naturally, or when certain style has worked for a considerable period, the difficulty is that you can go to the other side. Suppose a purist goes to the other side. It's not as if, let us take example of LNT again. It's not as if LNT will move from 900 to 1400 in a linear fashion. Even when those changes happen, there will be so much of volatility that the conviction will be tested. And conviction is a function of what your natural tilt is. You will never be able to capture that fully. If it doesn't come to you, you'll never be able to capture it fully. You'll partly capture, and one time it falls 10%, probably you are the first guy or among the first guys to get out of that because your conviction doesn't lie there. And that's why I said that in our portfolio also, you'll typically not see the reverse. You'll not see 70% value and 30% quality because the natural tilt is not on that side. But if facts change, we are willing to go to a certain extent because that and that too, again, very, very clear. And that's where I hope that we'll be able to see those facts ahead of time, is that you need to see what is the thing that is changing in SBI for me to own SBI in a meaningful proportion, or what is changing in LNT for me to own it in a proportion. which is say today HDFC Bank or some other stock, or HUL, any other quality compounding name that, as you guys understand it from outside, is there. If those facts change, suppose if if the if the fiscal were really good, and if the government was in a position to spend a lot of money, if the Middle East was doing really well, which is what the drivers are for L&T, we would all, by all means, will have a much higher proportion of L&T, because then you know that it is in uptrend in terms of ROE, it is in uptrend in terms of earnings, and then you would have a higher proportion of it in the portfolio. Nonetheless, I own it anyway, so in the portfolio. And it's been a mistake in a way for last 3 years.
Sure. So the other question is, now you have a style which is kind of homegrown. So as a part of your research process, is there something which is more unique to Can Robeco that you have figured it out internally, and it's something which is homegrown, and which you can say that this is a special part of Can Robeco in terms of the entire research process? Any unique thing that you want to highlight?
So see, the basics of investment process are always same for everybody. What I think gets differentiated is how diligently every day it is getting followed. That is one. So that I can clearly vouch that it is differentiated at Can Robeco. Second, and more technical, is there are a lot of behavioral tools that we have been using. And those behavioral tools have helped us in terms of screening the names, as well as actually reviewing our decision making. So there is something called as captain's log, which I want to just mention, which is where we as fund managers write all our decisions every time the decision is taken in a very short manner. That you just write 3 lines on why you bought HDFC Bank at 1100 rupees, and it is reviewed every quarter. That gives you a good perspective of what you thought and what happened, and that revision at all point in time makes your decision making more and more better. So that's one thing I would want to mention. There are a lot of other statistical as well as behavioral screeners that we run, which helps us to actually screen the same, be it on quality side or value side, screen the same 200 names of universe or 250 names of universe on certain factors, which throws up names, and then we go back and fundamentally check, is something changing. Like it kept on throwing generics, US generics for last 1.5 years. Every time Sun Pharma and Lupin and Cipla and all these names will come in the list. Now what do you do with that? Then you go back and check fundamentally, is anything changing in that? So these are the 2 specific things that I would want to mention. But I think the most important thing is how diligently every day people are coming and sticking to that broader framework. I'm not saying people will not do mistakes. All of us will do mistakes, and there will be deviation. But as long as that deviation is within the framework, within the permissible limits, and there is an incessant focus on earnings deviations, I think for a period of time it will be okay.
Sure. So Shri, when it comes to evaluating your fund's performance internally, how do you go about, both in terms of magnitude and time frame? What would be considered as outperformance, and what would be considered as underperformance?
So being public money manager, it is more relative. So although we look at the benchmarks and how we are doing vis-a-vis benchmarks, it is more how we are ranked within the category. Because suppose it's a multi-cap category, there are 30 funds, all 30 guys are equally capable, and there is the same external environment. So how we have done vis-a-vis them, typically what I observed is that at a gross basis, if you do something like 300, 350, 400 basis point over benchmark at gross basis, I'm saying net of fees probably 200 basis point, over a period of time, you would easily be in the top 50% people over a period of time, not every quarter. So we typically, although we review this every quarter, but the importance is more on 1, 3, 5 year basis. That's how we evaluate it, because you can't manage quarterly returns or biannual returns without changing portfolios too much, which as far as possible one should avoid, because then you'll always end up being on the wrong side of the trade, because then you will be chasing rather than being ahead of the trade.
Got it. Got it. We've also noticed that both globally and domestically, almost all good fund managers have had their periods of underperformance. So, be it Warren Buffett or you take any name, they've all gone through their periods of underperformance. Why do you think this happens? And hypothetically, why can't somebody kind of have only consistent performance through? Why is it that underperformance has to be a natural part of all fund managers' journey?
It's very natural because actually I partly answered this in the immediate previous question. You can't change your portfolio based on what is happening in market. So market can remain irrational for 6 months, a year. Hypothetically assume that today the PSU banks start running without any underlying factual change in the facts. If facts change and if they do well, that's a different thing. I'm saying they have collapsed like 60-70%. They can easily double. Now, does it mean somebody who doesn't own them for some reason should go back and own them just because they are doing well in today's environment? It doesn't happen that way. So there is a thought process, there is a philosophy, there is a reason why particular guy is running a fund in a particular way. Certain contrary things will keep on happening, whether you like it or not. It is just market phenomenon. There are sectors, just there will be bubbles, correct? There will be exuberance in a lot of segments of the markets for no particular reason, and it can sustain for 6 months, a year, 2 years also sometimes. Just look at infrastructure. So just to give you an example, I was infrastructure analyst in 2000. I started my journey as an infrastructure analyst, and the first pitch that I made to a CIO, and I told them that because I was just out of college and I was more theoretical, so I said these businesses are never going to generate any free cash. So why should somebody ascribe a 25 PE valuation multiple to these kind of businesses? So his flat answer was, no, you are just joined, you don't understand the dynamics of the market. And he was right and I was wrong. I don't know to take the name, it is a South Indian infrastructure company. It used to trade at I think 125 rupees. I said its value should be 60 rupees. It went on to become 250 rupees before now becoming 20 rupees after 10 years. So and that sustained for 2-3 years. And that's why I said that let me reconnect it back to the value part of market. I said if facts change, if something is changing for better in value side, there is no harm in going there. But if nothing is changing and stocks are doing well just because they have underperformed, a fund manager will not go there. You can't keep on changing portfolio just because stock prices are going up every quarter. And that's what leads to typically underperformance. Second, of course, is all fund managers are human beings, and they have their own biases and ego, if I can put it subtly. Sometimes facts change, and like what I said to you even in an earlier question also, that I was very conservative initially, and facts change, but I will not change. So for a lot of people, it is very difficult, and that's why we don't take this public position that we will only invest in quality, because that's not gospel truth. Quality compounding, we will invest in quality, but we are willing to go on both sides. I mean, if tomorrow the capital goods were to do well, there are enough quality companies, quality balance sheets, quality management available there. So when people take public position, not many times, it also becomes their own actually problem.
So, extending the same question, so which means obviously at some point in time, your funds will also have their periods, as you told.
By all means, yes.
Yeah. So at that point in time, for any investor who's already invested in your particular fund, what should be his checklist? Because your underperformance can be because of genuinely something going wrong. Because if I take the view that all underperformance is natural, then I'm also arguing for the fact that anybody who underperforms is fine. So how does somebody bring the nuance? So at some point in time, let's say in the future when you underperform, for an investor who's already invested, what should he look at? What should be his checklist, and how can he be sure that there's nothing fundamentally going wrong?
So I think the only thing that you have to check is like what you see, whether it is value or whether it is the growth. In our portfolio, if you see quality across on both part of the portfolio, if you see that changing meaningfully, that you see, no, these guys have moved from basically 30% value to 70% value, that too also quite below on the quality curve, that's when you should get worried that they're just being chasing the market rather than so that way you will underperform on both sides. So that is a good indicator. You can just look at the portfolio and it will tell you what these guys have done. And if the portfolio changed so much, and more so on quality of balance sheet and management I'm talking about. I'm saying value still can be higher if the general inflation comes back and growth comes back. So naturally you will have cyclicals being larger part of the portfolio, which are today value. Today people are ascribing them as value. So, but you shouldn't see a meaningful deviation in the core philosophy of what kind of businesses and management we are willing to hold. If that changes, I think there is no point to be in that fund, whether it is ours or somebody else's, vis-a-vis what they have communicated.
So, Shri, were there any previous instances where your fund went through a near-term underperformance, and at that point in time, how did you kind of manage and what happened at that point in time? Can you take us through that portion?
So 2-3 times since last 8 years, I think 3 or 4 instances. Yeah, 3 instances at least, which I remember distinctly. One was 2014 when Modi ji came and everybody thought that overnight India's per capita will move from 2 to 5,000. And so everybody started buying right, left, center, weak franchises, PSU banks, metals, ONCs, and anything that you can think of which doesn't move over a long period of time. That was one period. I didn't have to do anything. I just massively underperform, and so I just typically whenever I massively underperform, I just sit on that position. You don't change it unless and until there is enough reason on factual basis to change it, because you will then get it wrong on both sides. One, it is not style. You are going on the others territory, and you have lost the up move. So that was one. I just sat through. 3 quarter boss ka gali khaya, and 4th quarter it was all okay. So so that was one. Second was I think the mid cap rally that happened in 16-17. So we did well till quite late, but in last 2 quarters we just I just started thinking that it's just crazy. I mean, Infy available at 12 times PE with 10,000 crore rupees of free cash, and some very average 5,000 crore market cap company without any franchise is trading at 30 times forward earnings. So I got out of that trade little early, although we were not owning really weak franchises. But even our franchises started looking, why should this company trade at this valuation? Like, I'll just give one example I clearly remember, and all this is just for explanation purposes, no recommendation to buy or sell. L&T Finance started trading at 3 times price to book, which was crazy to me for an NBFC with so much of real estate exposure. I mean, an average book. I mean, nothing wrong with them, but we got out of that trade little early, and so 2 quarters, 1.5, 2 quarters, I think again it was pain, because people kept on coming and buying all sorts of mid caps and NBFCs, weaker NBFCs or relatively smaller NBFCs. The moment oil prices moved up and there was a hint on interest rates moving up and US actually reversing, at that point in time it had happened that US was intending to reverse the interest rate, the balance sheet expansion. So everything just corrected very sharply. So that was second. And third is, I think currently we're going through the another instance, PSU banks. I think PSU banks was another instance when we underperformed in that, but it was very short because that PSU bank trade just reversed in 2 months, I guess, flat 1.5, 2 months. September 18, I guess, September 18 or September 17. And in near term, I think this is currently we are going through that phase. At least I'm going through, not all our funds, but again, because a lot of businesses are moving up. This time around, I wouldn't say that it is necessarily it's mix. A lot of relatively quality franchises without earnings had also become too cheap. So there is a course correction. In our portfolio, naturally, we did not have most of them, so we did not correct so much. So there was no reason for us to come back so much. Currently that is happening, but again feel that unless and until there is a factual reason on earnings to change, valuation is one reason to buy 100 rupee fallen to 50 rupees. It can always move back to 60, 65, 70 rupees, but at some point in time it stops because you need a leg of earnings or fundamental changes for those businesses to continue to do well. So we have largely stuck to what we are doing, and hopefully it should be okay. Otherwise, you'll have one more example of underperforming fund manager. So
yeah, I'm sure it won't be the case. So just one last question, Sri. So this is probably the single most question. I mean, single most popular question that you would have kept on answering. So which that there's a disconnect between the markets and the economy. So how are you thinking through this whole? Do you think it's a natural part of all recoveries, or how are you thinking through this?
no, so first leg is natural part of the recovery. So even till late, probably Nifty. I'm just using Nifty level for
Right.
explanation purpose. Till 10,700, 10,500, even we were comfortable. We thought that given the changes that have happened, three changes that have happened, correct? One, of course, naturally, intrinsically, businesses had fallen to a level where they should not have. So there was a natural retracement of 10, 20%, 10, 15% that was bound to happen. Second, on a healthcare side, there was disproportionate fear in terms of what the outcomes would be. The outcomes haven't been that bad on healthcare side in terms of fatality rate or in terms of timeline, in terms of recovery rates. Particularly from India's perspective, recovery rate is at 75, and death rate is less than 2%, which is virtually, which initially was thought to be, when we saw what is happening in Spain and Italy, it was thought to be like 5-7%. So that was second reason why market came back, which means because economy is going to open up faster than what was anticipated. And third, and I think which is the most critical and which we're still confused how to actually evaluate it beyond a particular level of markets, is you never had this kind of fiscal expansion being done by in the history by the developed markets. So reaction is natural that fiscal expansion was bound to happen, but the pace at which it has happened has really surprised everybody, including us. And that remains the actually biggest leg for market, whereby people are thinking that every time if the economy doesn't recover, they will keep pumping the money, and it could possibly be the reverse, that the liquidity eventually driving the earnings rather than the earnings driving the valuations and all. And that's why people are willing to discount more. But that's where I feel that now we are more cautious. The risk is building in. Your odds of making disproportionate returns are low. So your odds have become even or less than even, because now markets is up 55% from bottom. And even if earnings for financial year 22 were best case would be same as what we were anticipating, probably market will be at 13,000. So your upside is 15-20% best case. Your downside could be much higher if things go bad. Although that is not our base case, market might not go down meaningfully because economic activity has actually started across the board. But that is making us more cautious now. What we feel that initially there's going to be a lot of pent up demand, and that's why you will see numbers everywhere to be better than what Street was estimating. But they might taper down a little bit in second, third quarter as the actual reality emerges that there is a loss of, say in case of India, there is a loss of 150-200 billion dollars of economic activity that has happened, which will show up somewhere. It might take time, but it will show up somewhere. So because of that, we are more cautious now. The only reason that keeps us constructive from a medium-term perspective is twofold. One, actually I can club it in one, is that your opportunity cost of holding savings is falling so dramatically that you are better off holding a growth asset even at a lower earnings yield, because today the earnings yield of GSEC and Nifty is almost same, around 6%. So you're better off holding equity asset at 6% than holding a risk-free rate at 6%, because typically that has been a good starting valuation point from medium-term perspective. it is just basically opportunity cost. If your opportunity cost is so low, if your opportunity cost post tax is 3.5-4%, then you're better off incrementally putting your savings in a growth asset where at least there is an optionality of growth which will play out, if not in immediate next 6 months, 8 months, or a year, but over a period of time. That's where your returns can be back-ended, but your returns would surely be significantly higher than the inflation that you see. Whereas on fixed income, effectively, I mean on bank deposits and other instruments, which is your opportunity cost, where you're effectively not making any money. If your core and inflation sustains at 4.5-5%, then you are losing money by holding that. So opportunity cost is the biggest reason, I think, why people and generally investors would be willing to ascribe little higher valuation than what the underlying earnings growth justify in near term.
Sure. Thank you so much, Shri, for all those fantastic insights and also sharing your experience with us. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot, Arun. Pleasure is all mine. Just again a disclaimer: most of the stocks that we spoke, either we are having them in portfolio or had them in portfolio at some point in time. None of that is a recommendation to buy, sell, or casting any aspiration of the kind of businesses or kind of management they are. So I think that disclaimer is important.
Sure, Shri. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.